I returned from my mother's bedside and found my wife locked in our basement. Our daughter had left her there to die. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The chain wasn't mine. I'd lived in that house for 19 years, and I had never installed a chain on the front door. But there it was, catching the last light of a February afternoon, keeping me out of my own home. Have you ever walked into your own house and felt like a stranger? Like the walls knew something you didn't? I stood on that porch with my keys in my hand, staring at a piece of metal that shouldn't exist, and my chest went tight. 11 days I'd been gone. 11 days holding my mother's hand while machines beeped and nurses whispered things I didn't want to hear. 11 days believing that when I came home, Lorraine would be at the door, arms open, asking if I was hungry. Instead, there was a chain, and behind that chain, silence. What was behind that basement door? And why had someone worked so hard to keep me from finding out? If you've ever trusted the wrong person with the people you love, this story is going to hit close to home. And if you think your family could never do something like this, I want you to hold that thought, because so did I. My mother died on a Tuesday. She went quiet around 3 in the morning, the way the hospice nurse said she would. One breath, then another, then nothing. I sat there holding her hand for 20 minutes before I could make myself stand up. She was 89 years old, and she'd been ready for weeks. I was the one who wasn't ready. I called Lorraine from the hospital parking lot at dawn. Her phone rang 5 times and went to voicemail. I figured she was sleeping. Lord knows she deserved the rest. For the past 11 days, she'd been sending me texts every few hours. Little things. Ate dinner. Cardinals are back at the feeder. Miss you. Give your mama a kiss for me. I tried again an hour later. Voicemail. By noon, I'd handled the paperwork, spoken to the funeral home, and sat through a meeting with my mother's pastor about the service. My phone stayed silent. No text from Lorraine, no missed calls. I told myself she was giving me space to grieve. I told myself a lot of things during that drive home. The highway from Dayton to Westerville takes about an hour and a half if traffic cooperates. That day, it felt longer. My eyes burned from no sleep. My back ached from the hospital chair I'd been living in. All I wanted was to pull into my driveway, walk through my front door, and let my wife hold me while I cried. I pulled in at 4:47 inches the afternoon. I remember the time because I looked at the dashboard clock and thought, she'll have dinner started by now. The first thing I noticed was the curtains. Lorraine kept the living room curtains open during the day. Always. She loved watching the cardinals at the bird feeder I'd hung from the oak tree 8 years ago, right after we got married. She'd sit in her chair by the window with her coffee and count them. 3 today, Walter. Your mother would say that's good luck. The curtains were closed. Heavy, not a crack of light showing through. I got out of the car slowly. My knees popped. My head was fuzzy from grief and exhaustion. I walked up the porch steps, pulled out my keys, and that's when I saw it. The chain. New. Brass. Bolted into the door frame on the inside. Visible through the narrow glass panel beside the door. I'd never installed a chain on that door. We'd talked about it once, years ago, and Lorraine said she didn't like them. Makes me feel locked in, she'd told me. I'd rather feel safe than trapped. I knocked. No answer. I rang the doorbell. Silence. I called her name through the door, and my voice bounced back at me like the house was empty. But it couldn't be empty. Lorraine's car was in the garage. I could see it through the window. I called her phone. Inside the house, I heard it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then, voicemail. The February cold was starting to bite through my coat. I stood there for a full minute, my breath making clouds in the air, trying to think of explanations. Maybe she was in the shower. Maybe she'd fallen asleep with her headphones on. Maybe nothing. Something was wrong. I went around to the side door, the one that led into the laundry room. We never locked it. Lorraine said it made her feel better knowing there was always a way out. It was locked. I found a loose brick near the garden bed and used it to break the glass. The sound was too loud in the quiet neighborhood. I reached through, turned the deadbolt, and pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Stale. Closed. Like air that hadn't moved in days. Underneath it, something chemical bleach. Maybe. But old bleach. And beneath that, something else. Something I couldn't name but that made my stomach drop. Lorraine? My voice echoed off the walls. The house was dark. Every blind closed. Every curtain drawn. I walked through the laundry room into the kitchen. Dishes in the sink. But not many. A coffee cup on the counter with something dried and dark at the bottom. The trash can was full. Lorraine? Honey? I'm home. Nothing. I checked the living room. Empty. Her chair by the window had a blanket thrown over it, like someone had tried to make it look unused. Her reading glasses were on the side table. Lorraine never went anywhere without her reading glasses. The bedroom. Empty. The bed was made. But wrong. Hospital corners. Lorraine made beds like she was folding laundry, soft, loose, comfortable. These corners were tight. Military. Someone else had made this bed. I was shaking by the time I reached the hallway. My phone was in my hand, and I'd already dialed Patricia's number without thinking. My daughter, my only child. She'd promised to check on Lorraine while I was gone. She'd promised. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Dad, oh my God, how's Grandma? I've been so worried. Patricia, where's Lorraine? A pause. Just a beat too long. What do you mean? She's at home, isn't she? I dropped off groceries 3 days ago. She was fine. She's not here. That's weird. Maybe she went for a walk? You know how she likes to. Patricia, the house is locked from the inside. The curtains are closed. Her car is in the garage. Silence. Then, Dad, I'm sure there's an explanation. Just calm down and... I hung up. The basement door was at the end of the hall. Heavy oak, original to the house. We used the basement for storage, mostly. Holiday decorations. Old furniture. The coal cellar, from when the house was built in 1920. The door was closed, and on the handle, where there had never been anything before, was a padlock. New, shiny, industrial. If someone you trusted changed the locks while you were gone, would you know the signs before it was too late? Subscribe now, because the warning signs in this story might save someone you love. And if you think this couldn't happen to you, tell me why in the comments. I read every single one. Before I open that door, I want you to pause. What would you expect to find? Hold that thought. I went to the garage. Found the crowbar I kept near the toolbox. My hands were steadier than they should have been. Later, I'd realize that was shock. In the moment, I just felt focused. Like the world had narrowed to one point. That padlock. I broke it with 2 hard pulls. The metal gave way with a sound like a bone snapping. The door swung open into darkness. The smell hit me first. Human. Desperate. Wrong. Urine. Sweat. Fear. If fear has a smell. Cold air rising from the concrete below. Then I heard it. A voice I barely recognized. Cracked and thin. Like paper tearing. Saying 2 words over and over. Walter. 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 My wife had been down there for 9 days. And taped to the inside of the door was a note in handwriting I knew as well as my own daughter's face. The flashlight beam found her in the corner, curled on concrete like something discarded. For 3 full seconds, I didn't recognize my own wife. She was smaller than I remembered. Folded in on herself, her knees drawn to her chest. Her silver hair matted against her skull. The thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders was the one we kept in the trunk of her car. She was lying on bare concrete, and the cold coming off that floor made my teeth ache. Lorraine. Lorraine. Honey. I'm here. Her eyes opened slowly, crusted at the corners, red-rimmed. For a moment, she looked at me like she didn't know who I was. Then her cracked lips moved, and she said my name again, and something in her face broke open. Walter, you came back. I'm here. I'm here, baby. I'm getting you out. I don't remember going down those stairs. I remember reaching her, touching her face, feeling how cold her skin was. I remember the way her bones felt through her shirt when I lifted her. She weighed nothing, nothing at all. 9 days, she whispered. She left me here 9 days. The basement smelled like suffering, urine and something worse in a bucket in the far corner. Concrete dust and damp, and the cold, cold February air seeping through the old foundation. There was one empty water bottle near where she'd been lying. One, for 9 days. No food wrappers. No sign that anyone had come back after the door was locked. I carried her up the stairs like she was made of glass. Each step creaked, and she flinched at every sound. When we got to the hallway, she squinted against the light, even though every curtain in the house was closed. Her eyes had adjusted to darkness. I set her on the couch and grabbed my phone, called 911. My voice came out steady, but my hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone twice. My wife was locked in our basement. 9 days. She needs an ambulance. Please, please hurry. The dispatcher asked questions I barely heard. Address, her age, was she conscious, was she breathing? I answered them all while I wrapped Lorraine in every blanket I could find. Her teeth were chattering. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and when she tried to lick them, I saw that her tongue was swollen. Don't talk, honey. Save your strength. But she grabbed my hand with fingers that felt like twigs and held on like I might disappear. She said you weren't coming back, Lorraine whispered. She said your mother was worse than they thought, that you might be gone for weeks, she said. Her voice trailed off. Her eyes closed. For one terrible second, I thought she'd stopped breathing. Lorraine! Her eyes fluttered open. Just tired, Walter. So tired. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. I know, because I counted every second. 2 paramedics came through the door I'd left hanging open, and I watched their faces change as they looked at my wife. That's when I knew how bad it was. They didn't say anything, but I'd worked construction for 40 years. I knew what it looked like when professionals were trying to hide alarm. They started an IV before they moved her. Something about dehydration levels and blood pressure. Words I didn't fully understand, but I understood the urgency underneath them. They strapped her to a gurney and carried her out into the cold February evening. And I climbed into the back of the ambulance, because there was no way I was letting her out of my sight. 9 days, no food, concrete floor, February in Ohio. How long could you survive? More importantly, who in your life would you never suspect of being capable of this? 9 days of silence, and no one checked. No one called. If you disappeared tomorrow, who would notice by day 3? Subscribe, because this story is about to reveal how easily families hide the unthinkable. In the ambulance, Lorraine drifted in and out. The paramedic worked quickly, adjusting the IV, checking her vitals, speaking in calm tones that didn't match the speed of his hands. I held her fingers through it all, and I asked questions she was too weak to answer fully. Who did this, Lorraine? How did this happen? She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much darkness, and she said, "You know who." I did know, I just didn't want to say it out loud. At the hospital, they rushed her through double doors and told me to wait. A nurse pressed papers into my hands. Forms. Questions. Insurance. I filled them out like a machine while my mind stayed in that basement, trying to understand how my daughter, my only child, could have done this. An hour later, a different nurse came to find me. Young, kind eyes. She was carrying a sealed plastic bag with Lorraine's belongings from the basement. I hadn't even noticed them taking anything. "Mr. Brennan, your wife is stable. The doctor will come talk to you soon about her condition. But I wanted to give you these personally." She handed me the bag. Through the clear plastic, I could see Lorraine's wedding ring, her reading glasses, and something else. A 3-inch nail, filed to a point. She was holding this when the paramedics found her, the nurse said. She wouldn't let go. We had to pry it from her fingers. I stared at that nail, rusty at one end, sharpened to a fine point at the other. My wife had been left to die in a basement, and she had spent her time making a weapon. I didn't understand yet, but I would. She was trying to steal everything. I did what you couldn't. 14 words. My daughter's handwriting. Her explanation for attempted murder. I read that note 40 times in the hospital waiting room. I know because I counted. Each time. I kept hoping the words would change, hoping I'd misread them, hoping there was some explanation that made sense. There wasn't. Patricia's handwriting was as familiar to me as my own. I'd seen it on birthday cards, on grocery lists, stuck to the refrigerator. On the note she'd left me when she graduated from law school. "Thanks for believing in me, Dad. Love always. P." Now I was seeing it on a confession. I sat in that plastic chair under the harsh hospital lights, and I made myself remember every warning sign I'd ignored. The first Christmas, after Lorraine and I got engaged, Patricia didn't come home. Said she had a case she couldn't get away from. She sent a card. No gift. For Lorraine. No mention of her. At all. The second year, she came but spent the whole dinner asking about my will. Just want to make sure you're protected, Dad. She looked at Lorraine when she said, protected, and there was nothing warm in her eyes. The third year, she started mentioning prenuptial agreements. Did you ever get one of those drawn up? You should really consider it. You never know what people's real intentions are. I told her to stop. Told her Lorraine wasn't like that. Told her she was being unfair. Patricia smiled and said, of course, Dad, you're right. I'm just looking out for you. But the comments never stopped. They just got quieter. More careful. A raised eyebrow when Lorraine bought new curtains. A pause. Before answering, when I said Lorraine and I were taking a trip. Questions about the house title. About my pension. About the jewelry her mother had left me, jewelry Lorraine now wore. I just want to make sure Mom's things stay in the family, Patricia said once, her voice soft and reasonable. You understand? I should have seen it. I should have known. But she was my daughter, my little girl, the child I raised alone after her mother died when Patricia was 19. I'd watched her struggle through law school, working nights, eating ramen, pushing through grief that never fully healed. I'd seen her build a career, buy a house, become someone the community respected. I couldn't see the monster underneath. I didn't want to. The police arrived at the hospital around 10 that night. 2 officers and a detective. The detective was a woman about Patricia's age, with sharp eyes and a voice that didn't waste words. Mr. Brennan? I'm Detective Vera Okonkwo, with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. We need to ask you some questions about what happened to your wife. I nodded. I couldn't speak. The note was still in my hand. Can you tell us who might have done this? The question hung in the air. This was the moment. Once I answered, there was no going back. Patricia would be investigated. Arrested. My daughter, my only child, would become a criminal. I thought about all the years I'd spent protecting her, all the sacrifices I'd made to give her a good life, all the times I'd chosen to see the best in her, even when she gave me reasons not to. Then, I thought about Lorraine. Lying in a hospital bed down the hall. 9 days on a concrete floor. 1 bottle of water. Left to die by someone she'd tried to love. I held out the note. My daughter, I said. Patricia Brennan Holloway. She did this. Detective Okonkwo's face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She took the note carefully, read it, and nodded once. Mr. Brennan, did your daughter ever discuss power of attorney with you? Specifically, documents that would take effect if you were found mentally unfit. I blinked. Power of attorney? No. I mean, she mentioned it once or twice, but I never signed anything. Are you certain? I'm certain. The detective looked at her partner. Something passed between them. Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you this directly. Have you had any cognitive evaluations recently? Seen any doctors about memory issues or confusion? No, nothing like that. I'm 71, but my mind is fine. Why are you asking? Detective Okonkwo's jaw tightened. Because according to documents we found in your daughter's home office, a doctor named Clifford Sedgwick performed a cognitive evaluation on you 6 weeks ago. The evaluation states that you're exhibiting early-stage cognitive decline and impaired judgment regarding financial decisions. I stared at her. I've never heard that name in my life. Before she was the woman in the basement, Lorraine Vance was the sharpest legal secretary in Toledo. For 30 years, she watched lawyers win and lose. And she learned one thing above all: documentation is survival. I didn't know that when I met her. I just knew she had kind eyes and a laugh that made me feel less alone. We met at a grief support group at the Methodist Church on 5th Street. My first wife, Carolyn, had been dead for 2 years, and I was still walking around like a man made of cardboard, going through the motions. Eating food I couldn't taste. Sleeping in a bed that felt too big. The group met on Thursday nights. I went because my doctor said I should, and I sat in the back with my coffee and said nothing for the first 3 weeks. Lorraine sat 2 chairs away. She'd lost her sister to cancer, the sister who'd raised her after their parents died young. She didn't say much either, but when she did speak, people listened. She had this way of cutting through the fog and finding the truth underneath. One night after the meeting, we ended up at the same diner. Sat across from each other in a vinyl booth, drinking bad coffee, and talked until midnight. She told me about growing up in East Toledo, the part of town where the steel mills used to be. Her father worked the line until it killed him. Her mother worked 2 cleaning jobs until she just wore out. Lorraine put herself through community college, answering phones at night, then landed a job at a family law firm that paid better than anything she'd ever dreamed of. 30 years of watching people fight over money and children and houses, she said. 30 years of seeing the worst of what families do to each other. You learn to read people. You learn to keep records. I learned later what that meant. Lorraine had spent 3 decades watching lawyers build cases. She knew how evidence worked. She knew what held up in court and what didn't. She knew that memory was unreliable, but paper never forgot. Our courtship was slow. Neither of us was in a hurry to make another mistake. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. Quiet dinners, long walks, conversations that didn't need to fill every silence. She made me feel like I had something worth offering again. I made her feel like someone was finally paying attention. When I told Patricia about the engagement, she smiled. The smile didn't reach her eyes. That's great, Dad. I'm happy for you. A pause. Have you thought about protecting your assets? Mom's jewelry? The house? Just want to make sure everything's secure. Lorraine was standing right there when Patricia said it. She didn't react. Just smiled politely and offered Patricia a cup of coffee. But later, in the car, she was quiet. Your daughter doesn't like me, she said. She just needs time to adjust. She's protective. Lorraine nodded slowly. Maybe. Or maybe she sees something in me that isn't there. She paused. Or maybe she just sees that I'm not going anywhere. Over the next 8 years, Lorraine watched Patricia the way she'd watched 1,000 witnesses during her years at the law firm. She didn't argue with her, didn't confront her, just observed. And, quietly, she documented the missed holiday invitations, the passive comments about money, the way Patricia always counted what Lorraine was wearing, looking for her mother's earrings, her mother's bracelet, her mother's ring. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought your job title told them everything they needed to know about you? Lorraine had. For 8 years, she let Patricia believe she was just a waitress who got lucky. That patience was about to pay off. See, Patricia made a mistake common to people who think they're the smartest one in the room. She assumed that because Lorraine was friendly and quiet, Lorraine was also naive. She assumed that a woman who'd worked as a legal secretary couldn't possibly understand the complexities of estate planning and cognitive evaluations and power of attorney documents. She was wrong. 2 months before I left for Dayton, Lorraine noticed something. We were having lunch with Patricia, a rare occurrence that Patricia had initiated. Something about wanting to spend more time together as a family. Lorraine was gracious, as always. Patricia was charming, as always. I was just happy to see them in the same room without tension. At the end of lunch, Patricia walked us to our car. That's when Lorraine saw it. A folder on Patricia's passenger seat, thick, legal-sized, with a tab she could read through the window. Brennan, W. Capacity Evaluation. Lorraine didn't mention it. She hugged Patricia goodbye, told her lunch was lovely, and got into our car with a smile on her face. That night, after I went to bed, Lorraine went to the spare room where she kept an old filing cabinet. She opened the bottom drawer, the one I never looked in, and started a new folder. She labeled it Insurance. Over the next 2 months, she filled it with dates, times, overheard phone conversations, copies of emails she'd seen open on Patricia's laptop, notes about every question Patricia asked about the will, the house, the pension. She didn't tell me because she knew I wouldn't believe her. She knew I'd make excuses for my daughter, the way I always did. So she did what 30 years at a law firm had taught her to do. She gathered evidence. And she waited. Patricia Brennan Holloway was the kind of daughter other parents envied. Real estate attorney, church volunteer, first one to organize the neighborhood watch. No one asks what's behind a mask that perfect. I used to brag about her at the hardware store, at the barber shop, at the diner where I'd have breakfast on Saturday mornings. My daughter graduated top of her class. My daughter just closed a big deal. My daughter's helping the youth group raise money for the homeless shelter. The other fathers would nod and say they wish their kids were half as accomplished. I'd smile and change the subject because I didn't want to seem like I was showing off. But inside, I was proud. So proud. I didn't know what lived underneath all that polish. Patricia was 19 when her mother died. Carolyn had been sick for 2 years, breast cancer that came back twice before it finally won. Patricia was a sophomore in college when it started. By the time it ended, she'd watched her mother shrink from a vibrant woman into a shadow, and she'd watched me fall apart, trying to hold everyone together. I wasn't there for her the way I should have been. I know that now. I was so consumed with caring for Carolyn, with managing doctors and medications and insurance fights, that I didn't see what was happening to my daughter. She needed me, and I was empty. After Carolyn died, Patricia finished college in 3 years instead of 4. Law school in 2.5. Passed the bar on her first try. Got a job at a firm in Dublin before she'd even graduated. She did everything fast, everything alone. And she never asked for help. I thought that made her strong. I didn't realize it made her angry. The anger didn't show on the surface. Patricia was always smiling, always polished, always saying the right things. But underneath, she was keeping score. Every time I leaned on someone else, every time I didn't call her first when I needed advice, every time I acted like I could manage without her. And then I married Lorraine. To Patricia, it was the ultimate betrayal. Not because I found happiness again, she would have accepted that, eventually, but because I found it with someone outside the family. Someone who hadn't been there for the hospital vigils and the funeral arrangements and the long nights when I couldn't stop crying. Someone who, in Patricia's mind, had no right to any of what Carolyn had left behind. The inheritance wasn't much, by Patricia's Dublin standards. The Westerville house, bought in 1982 and paid off in 2005. My pension from 40 years in construction, a life insurance policy, and Carolyn's jewelry, modest pieces, mostly, but they'd been her mother's before her, and they meant everything to Patricia. When Lorraine started wearing the pearl earrings, Patricia stopped coming to dinner. When Lorraine wore the emerald ring to Christmas Eve service, Patricia's smile became something that looked like a blade. She never said anything directly. That wasn't her style. Instead, she started asking questions. Careful questions. Questions that planted seeds. Dad, have you thought about updating your estate plan? Things change when you get remarried. Dad, I was talking to a colleague who handles elder law. He said a lot of people your age don't realize how vulnerable they are to influence. Dad, if something ever happened to you, who would make decisions? Have you thought about giving someone power of attorney? Someone you trust? I should have seen the pattern. I should have heard what she was really saying. Not someone you trust, but me. But I didn't. Because she was my daughter. Because I loved her. Because I couldn't imagine that the girl I'd raised could be capable of what she was planning. Here's the question that kept investigators up at night. Did Patricia actually believe she was the good guy in this story? The answer is more disturbing than you think. She did. She absolutely did. In Patricia's mind, she wasn't planning to hurt anyone. She was protecting her family, protecting her mother's memory, protecting me from a woman who had manipulated me during a vulnerable time. Every step she took was justified, in her own head, by love. The doctor, from her homeowners association who agreed to evaluate me without ever meeting me, he was helping protect a confused old man. The notary who prepared power of attorney documents that I never saw, she was ensuring a smooth transition if my cognitive decline got worse. The elder law attorney, who helped Patricia understand how to have Lorraine removed from the house, he was advocating for family values. A doctor, a notary, an attorney, all willing to help. How many people in your circle would cover for something they knew was wrong? Subscribe, because what comes next will make you look at your own family differently. Still think you're safe? Tell me in the comments, what made you sure? 6 months before I left for Dayton, Patricia had everything in place. All she needed was an opportunity. My mother's illness gave her that. When I called Patricia to tell her I had to go to Dayton, that Mama was failing, and I needed to be there, Patricia's voice was warm and supportive. Of course, Dad, you have to go. Family comes first. I'm worried about Lorraine being alone. She doesn't know the neighbors well. And, Dad, don't even think about it. I'll check on her every day. I'll bring groceries. I'll make sure she has everything she needs. I thanked her. I actually thanked her. 3 days before I left, Patricia stopped by with groceries for Lorraine. Milk, bread, soup, and a freshly copied key to the front door. Just in case Dad needs me to check on things, she said with a smile. Lorraine thanked her. And that night, when she thought I was asleep, Lorraine added one more entry to her insurance folder. P. Now has key. Watch the house. Day 1. Footsteps above, at 7 a.m. No food. Day 2. Toilet flushed upstairs, twice. No food. By day 3, Lorraine stopped hoping and started documenting. She told me all of it later, in pieces, when she was strong enough to talk. Some of it came out in the hospital. Some of it came out during sleepless nights when neither of us could close our eyes. Some of it came out in her testimony, under oath, with her voice steady and her hands folded in her lap like she was reciting a grocery list instead of describing 9 days of hell. The first hours were the worst, she said, not because of the cold or the dark, but because she still believed it was a mistake. When Patricia locked that door, Lorraine thought there had to be an explanation. Maybe Patricia was angry about something and needed time to cool down. Maybe she'd come back in an hour with an apology and the key. Maybe Walter would call, and Patricia would feel guilty, and the whole thing would be over before dinner. So Lorraine yelled. She pounded on the door until her fists were bruised. She screamed Patricia's name until her throat was raw. She listened for footsteps, for the sound of the lock turning, for any sign that someone remembered she was down there. Nothing. By the second day, she understood. This wasn't anger. This wasn't a moment of madness. Patricia had planned this, and Patricia wasn't coming back. That's when Lorraine started thinking like the woman she used to be. The legal secretary who spent 30 years watching how cases were built. The woman who knew that memory fades, but evidence doesn't. She needed to document. The basement was nearly pitch black. The only light came from a small window at ground level, covered with grime and half blocked by a bush outside. Just enough to see shapes. Just enough to tell day from night. Lorraine crawled across the concrete floor, feeling with her fingers for anything she could use. Old boxes, broken furniture, dust and cobwebs, and the smell of decades of neglect. And then she found it. A nail. 3 inches long, rusted at one end, loose in the crumbling mortar between 2 stones. She pulled it free and held it in her palm. It wasn't much, but it was something. The wall next to where she'd been lying was rough concrete. The kind they poured in the 1,920 seconds when the house was built. Soft enough to scratch if you pressed hard enough. Hard enough to last. Lorraine started writing. Day 1, February 3. Locked in at approximately 2 p.m. P. Left immediately. No food, no water. Each letter took effort. Her fingers cramped. The nails slipped and cut her palm. But she kept going. Day 2. February 4. Footsteps above 7 a.m., 11 a.m., 3 p.m., 9 p.m. Vacuum running 2 p.m. No contact. She documented everything she heard. Patricia's heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The television playing in the evening. Phone calls where Patricia's voice was too muffled to understand, but the tone was casual, relaxed, normal. Normal life happening 20 feet above a woman who was slowly starving. In complete darkness, with no food, no phone, and no guarantee of rescue. Would you have the presence of mind to gather evidence? Or would you just scream and pray? There's no wrong answer. But Lorraine's answer is about to put her stepdaughter in prison. On day 3, Lorraine found the water bottle. It was sitting on the top stair, just inside the basement door. 1 bottle, 16 ounces. Left there sometime during the night, because it hadn't been there when Lorraine checked the door before trying to sleep. She stared at it for a long time. Part of her wanted to drink it all at once. Her lips were already cracking. Her head pounded from dehydration. Every instinct screamed at her to gulp it down and pray for more. But she didn't. Lorraine understood what that bottle meant. It wasn't mercy, it was calculation. Patricia wanted her alive, but weak. Alive long enough for whatever came next. Weak enough not to fight it. She took 1 sip, then another. Then she capped the bottle and made herself wait. And she scratched a new entry into the wall. Day 3. Water bottle left on stairs. 1. No food. P. Wants me alive, but not strong. Why? The days blurred after that. Lorraine rationed the water, taking tiny sips every few hours. She slept in fits, waking to scratch new observations whenever she heard sounds above. She lost track of how many times she cried. She lost track of how many times she prayed. But she never lost track of the days. Day 7, February 9. Visitor at front door, 7:12 p.m. Female voice, older. P. tells her L. is visiting sister in Cleveland. Visitor leaves, satisfied. That one hurt more than the hunger. Someone had come, someone had asked, and Patricia had lied, and the someone had believed her, and the footsteps walked away and didn't come back. By day 9, Lorraine had stopped expecting rescue. She'd started thinking about what would happen when her body was found, whether the scratches on the wall would be enough, whether anyone would believe them. Then she heard glass breaking. The side door. Someone was coming in through the side door. She held her breath. It could be Patricia, coming to finish what she'd started. It could be a stranger. It could be anyone. And then she heard a voice, hoarse, desperate, calling her name. Walter. She tried to answer, but her voice was gone. She'd screamed it away days ago. All she could do was whisper, over and over, the only word that mattered. Walter, Walter, Walter. When the police forensic team photographed the basement wall, they counted 47 distinct scratches, dates, times, sound descriptions. But it was the final entry that made the lead detective sit down. Day 9, 4:47 p.m. On phone upstairs. Says, tell Walter I've been checking on her every day. She's fine. Just resting. He'll never know. She was wrong. The document was dated 2 weeks before I left for Dayton. It declared me exhibiting early-stage cognitive decline with impaired judgment regarding financial decisions. I had never met the doctor who signed it. Detective Okonkwo showed it to me 3 days after we found Lorraine. I was sitting in a plastic chair in the hospital hallway, running on coffee and fear, and she handed me a photocopy of something that looked official enough to ruin my life. Mr. Brennan, do you recognize this? I read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. Cognitive Capacity Evaluation. Patient, Walter J. Brennan. Date of examination, January 19. Examiner, Dr. Clifford Sedgwick, M.D. Psychiatry. The report was 3 pages long. It described memory lapses I'd never had, confusion I'd never shown, susceptibility to financial manipulation by non-family members. It recommended immediate intervention by trusted family members to protect patients' assets and well-being. I've never seen this before, I said. I've never heard of this doctor. I didn't have any evaluation in January. I was home. I was fine. Detective Okonkwo nodded slowly. We didn't think you had, Doctor. Sedgwick's office has no record of an appointment with you. No billing, no intake forms, nothing. Then how? Your daughter and Dr. Sedgwick are both members of the Bridgewater Heights Homeowners Association. They've served on the same committee for 3 years. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. She made it up. She had a doctor fake an evaluation of me, and I was never even in the room. That's what it looks like, Mr. Brennan. A doctor you've never met signs a paper saying you can't think straight. Your own daughter provides the evidence. How would you prove you're not confused when the system already believes you are? Over the next week, Detective Okonkwo and her team pulled the thread, and the whole conspiracy started to come apart. Dr. Clifford Sedgwick was 73 years old, semi-retired, living off investments and the occasional private consultation. He'd known Patricia for years, liked her, trusted her. When she came to him with concerns about her father, he's forgetting things, he's making bad decisions, he married this woman none of us know. Sedgwick had been sympathetic. I thought I was helping, he told investigators. Patricia was so worried. She said her father wouldn't agree to an evaluation because the wife had convinced him nothing was wrong. She said if I just documented what she was describing, she could use it to get him help. He wrote the evaluation based on Patricia's descriptions. 3 pages of lies, dressed up in medical language. He signed it, dated it, and handed it to Patricia like a gift. He never called me, never met me, never asked a single question. When the medical board opened an investigation, Sedgwick's lawyer started talking about cooperation deals and diminished responsibility. A doctor who'd spent 40 years building a reputation, was suddenly looking at losing his license because he'd trusted the wrong person. But Sedgwick wasn't the only one Patricia had recruited. The emails Detective Okonkwo found on Patricia's laptop painted a picture of a woman who'd been planning this for months. Exchanges with Sedgwick about protecting Dad. Conversations with a notary named Gwendolyn Marsh about time-sensitive documents. Research on emergency guardianship procedures in Ohio. And then there was Lorraine's insurance folder. I didn't know about the folder until the detective showed it to me. Lorraine had never mentioned it. She'd kept it hidden, filled it in secret, and somehow managed to grab it before Patricia locked her in the basement. Inside was a photograph from that lunch 2 months before I left for Dayton. Lorraine had taken it from the car while Patricia was walking away. You could see Patricia's passenger seat through the window. And on that seat, clear as anything, was a folder with a tab that read, Brennan, W., Capacity Evaluation. Lorraine had known. She'd seen the folder, understood what it meant, and started building her own case. Your wife is remarkable, Detective Okonkwo said. Most people in her situation would have been blindsided. She saw this coming. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Why didn't she tell me? The detective's expression softened. Would you have believed her? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say I would have listened, would have taken her seriously, would have confronted Patricia and put an end to all of it before anyone got hurt. But we both knew the truth. If Lorraine had come to me with suspicions about my daughter, I would have made excuses. I would have said she was being paranoid. I would have chosen to believe in Patricia because believing anything else was too painful. Lorraine knew that, so she kept her folder and waited. But the cognitive evaluation was just the foundation. What Patricia built on top of it was worse. In the same drawer where they found the fake evaluation, detectives found a second document, a durable power of attorney, naming Patricia as sole decision-maker for my medical care, my finances, and my living arrangements. It was fully executed, legally witnessed, ready to file. The signature line for me was still blank. But someone had been practicing my handwriting in the margins. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Wait for Walter to return exhausted and grieving. Present the papers as protection. Get one signature. Erase Lorraine legally before anyone asked questions. Detective Okonkwo laid it all out for me in a conference room at the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. She had a whiteboard covered in dates and arrows. She had folders full of documents. She had the look of someone who'd seen a lot of terrible things but still managed to be shocked by this one. Your daughter wasn't improvising, she said. This was planned for at least 6 months, maybe longer. She walked me through the timeline, and with each new detail, I felt something inside me grow colder. January, Patricia contacts Dr. Sedgwick about a cognitive evaluation. The fake report is created. Late January, Patricia meets with Gwendolyn Marsh, a notary in Dublin, to prepare power of attorney documents. She explains that her father is declining and that she needs to step in before the wife does something irreversible. Early February, my mother takes a turn for the worse. I tell Patricia I need to go to Dayton. She volunteers to watch over Lorraine. February 3. 2 hours after I leave for Dayton, Patricia arrives at my house with the key she'd copied. Lorraine answers the door. Within 30 minutes, Lorraine is locked in the basement. The original plan, Detective Okonkwo explained, was for me to be gone for at least 2 weeks. My mother was supposed to linger. Patricia had spoken to the hospice nurses, had gotten estimates, had built her timeline around my absence. While I was in Dayton, Lorraine would weaken. 9 days without food, minimal water, no medical care. By the time I came home, she'd be confused, dehydrated, maybe too weak to speak clearly. Patricia would already have called Adult Protective Services with concerns about Lorraine's erratic behavior. The fake cognitive evaluation would be on file, showing that I couldn't make sound decisions. I would walk into my own house and find my helpful daughter waiting with papers to sign. Dad, the doctor says you need support. Let me handle things while you grieve. Just sign here. One signature, that's all it would have taken. With power of attorney, Patricia could have removed Lorraine from the house for her own safety, could have accessed my bank accounts, could have made medical decisions on my behalf, could have, if she wanted, put me in a facility and sold the house out from under me. And Lorraine? Patricia had already researched emergency protective orders. She was going to file one claiming that Lorraine was exploiting a vulnerable adult, using the fake evaluation as proof that I was vulnerable and couldn't see what Lorraine was really doing. If Walter had come home on Tuesday instead of Saturday, he would have found a clean house, a helpful daughter, and papers to sign. Lorraine would have been removed by Emergency Protective Services within the week. How many families are living that version of this story right now? 4 days. That's how close this story came to ending, with Lorraine erased and Patricia in control of everything. Do you know who has power of attorney over your parents, your spouse, you? Subscribe, because the next story might be the one that makes you check. And if you think your family could never do this, prove me wrong in the comments. My mother didn't follow Patricia's timeline. She died 4 days early, and I came home before the plan was complete. Lorraine was still alive, still coherent, still remembering every sound, every silence, every lie Patricia told through the ceiling. And she still had her folder. The notary, Gwendolyn Marsh, cooperated with investigators within 48 hours of being contacted. She was scared. She'd notarized documents for Patricia before routine real estate stuff, nothing unusual. But when she saw the news coverage of what had happened, when she realized what those power of attorney papers were actually for, she called a lawyer and started talking. Patricia told me her father was confused and her stepmother was taking advantage, Marsh said in her statement. She seemed so concerned, so responsible. I had no idea. That was the common thread. Everyone Patricia recruited had no idea. They saw what she wanted them to see: the dutiful daughter, the responsible attorney, the woman who just wanted to protect her family. This wasn't elder abuse, Detective Okonkwo said, closing her folder. This was a hostile takeover disguised as caregiving. She paused, then looked at me with something that might have been pity. Mr. Brennan, I've worked these cases for 11 years. This is the most sophisticated scheme I've ever seen. Your daughter didn't make mistakes. She covered every angle. The only reason it failed is because your mother died early, and your wife is smarter than Patricia gave her credit for. I sat with that for a long time. My daughter had planned to take everything from me: my wife, my home, my freedom, my mind, at least on paper, and she'd almost succeeded. The detective laid all the documents on the table where Lorraine was still recovering. The fake evaluation. The unsigned power of attorney. The practice signatures in the margins. Then she asked a question that made Lorraine smile for the first time since the basement. Mrs. Brennan, I understand you kept your own records. Would you be willing to share your insurance folder? Lorraine reached under her hospital pillow and pulled out a manila folder 3 inches thick. I was wondering when you'd ask. Detective Vera Okonkwo had worked elder abuse cases for 11 years. She thought she'd seen everything. Then she opened Lorraine's insurance folder. I watched her face as she turned the pages. She was good at keeping her expression neutral. You don't last long in that job without learning how to hide what you're feeling. But her eyes gave her away. With each new document, each dated entry, each photograph, something shifted in the way she looked at my wife. It wasn't pity, it was respect. Mrs. Brennan, she said slowly, when did you start this? Lorraine was sitting up in her hospital bed, still hooked to an IV, but looking more like herself than she had since I'd found her. Her voice was steady. About 8 months ago, after Patricia started asking questions about the will. And you documented everything? Everything I could. Dates, times, conversations. When she asked for a key to the house, I wrote it down. When she made comments about my spending, I wrote it down. When I saw that folder in her car, I took a photograph. Detective Okonkwo flipped to the photograph, studied it, looked back at Lorraine. Most victims don't think like this. I'm not most victims. Lorraine's smile was thin but real. I spent 30 years watching people build cases. I know what evidence looks like. I knew Patricia was planning something. I just didn't know how bad it would be. 11 years of elder abuse cases. And Detective Okonkwo said this one kept her up at night. Not because of the cruelty she'd seen worse, but because of how close it came to working. How many Patricia Brennan Holloways got away with it because their victims didn't have a folder? The detective spent 3 hours with Lorraine that day. She went through every page of the insurance folder, asked questions about every entry, made notes in a legal pad that filled up faster than I'd ever seen anyone write. When she was done, she turned to me. Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you some questions now. And I need honest answers, even if they're painful. I nodded. Did you know your wife was keeping this folder? No. Did you have any suspicions about your daughter's behavior before this happened? I hesitated. The honest answer was harder than I wanted it to be. No. I mean, I knew Patricia didn't like Lorraine, she made that clear, but I thought it was just adjustment. I thought she'd come around eventually. Did Lorraine ever tell you she was worried about Patricia? Not directly. She'd make comments sometimes. Say things like, your daughter's very interested in the will, or Patricia asked about the house again. But she never said she was scared, never said she thought Patricia would hurt her. Detective Okonkwo wrote something in her pad. Why do you think she didn't tell you? I looked at Lorraine. She was watching me with those steady eyes, waiting to see what I'd say. Because she knew I wouldn't believe her. She knew I'd make excuses for Patricia, and she was right. I would have. Lorraine reached out and took my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Over the next several days, the investigation expanded. Detective Okonkwo and her team interviewed Dr. Sedgwick, who cooperated fully once he realized his medical license was on the line. They interviewed Gwendolyn Marsh, the notary, who cried through her entire statement. They searched Patricia's home office and found more documents, more emails, more proof of what she'd been planning. The basement wall scratches were photographed and cataloged. 47 entries, each one corroborating something in Lorraine's insurance folder. The dates matched, the times matched. The sounds Lorraine had documented from below were confirmed by cell phone records and credit card receipts from above. Patricia had been living her normal life, while my wife starved 20 feet below her. She'd gone to work, she'd met friends for coffee. She'd vacuumed my living room and flushed my toilets and made phone calls where she assured people that everything was fine. The arrest warrant was drafted on a Thursday morning. Charges included felonious assault, kidnapping, attempted murder, and elder abuse. The prosecutor told Detective Okonkwo it was one of the strongest cases she'd ever built. The victim did half our work for us, the prosecutor said. Between the wall and the folder, Patricia Brennan Holloway documented her own crime. The warrant was signed at 4:15 p.m. But when officers arrived at Patricia's Dublin home at 6:30 p.m., her car was gone. Her laptop was missing. A neighbor reported seeing her loading suitcases into her trunk that morning. Patricia Brennan Holloway had 48 hours of head start. The only thing she left behind was a voicemail on my phone. I didn't hear it until that night, when Detective Okonkwo asked if Patricia had tried to contact me. I played it on speaker. Patricia's voice filled the room calm, almost gentle, like she was explaining something obvious to a child who couldn't quite understand. Dad, I did this for you. Everything I did was for you. She was going to take everything Mom left us, the house, the jewelry, your pension, everything Mom worked for. I couldn't let that happen. Why can't you see that? I was protecting you. I was protecting our family. And now, everyone's acting like I'm the criminal. But you'll understand eventually. You'll see I was right. I love you, Dad. I always have. I just wish you'd loved me enough to trust me. The message ended. Detective Okonkwo looked at me. Mr. Brennan, are you all right? I wasn't. I wasn't sure I'd ever be all right again. 14 houses on Maple Ridge Drive. 53 adults within shouting distance. 9 days of imprisonment. 0 calls to police. The suburbs are excellent at looking away. I grew up in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. If someone's lights didn't come on by dinner time, 3 different neighbors would be knocking on the door to check. If a kid was crying too loud or too long, somebody's mother would march over and find out why. We were in each other's business because being in each other's business was how you kept people safe. Maple Ridge Drive wasn't like that. Oh, it looked like it was. There were block parties twice a year, a neighborhood watch sign at the entrance, a Facebook group where people posted about suspicious cars and lost dogs, and requests for lawn service recommendations. But when it came down to it, when it actually mattered, nobody wanted to get involved. Detective Okonkwo interviewed every household on our street. What she found made her angry enough to say so in her official report. The Hendersons at number 12 noticed Patricia's car in my driveway more than usual. They figured she was helping out while I was away. Good daughter. The Garcias at number 8 noticed the curtains were always closed. They figured Lorraine was sick or maybe just liked her privacy, not their business. The Morgans at number 15 noticed they hadn't seen Lorraine at the mailbox in over a week. They figured she was traveling. People do that. Everyone figured, everyone assumed, everyone told themselves a story that let them stay comfortable. Here's the question I want you to sit with. If you heard nothing from your neighbor for 9 days, at what point would you check? Day 3? Day 5? Or would you tell yourself it's not your business until someone else called first? The one person who almost made a difference was Dolores Whitman. Dolores was 82 years old, a widow who'd lived on Maple Ridge Drive longer than anyone. She'd known Lorraine for 8 years. They'd drink coffee together on Sunday mornings when the weather was nice. They'd talk about birds and grandchildren, and the way the neighborhood had changed since the old families started selling. On day 6, Dolores noticed something felt wrong. She couldn't have said what, exactly. Just that she hadn't seen Lorraine in almost a week, and that felt strange. So she walked over, knocked on the front door, waited. Patricia answered. "Oh, Mrs. Whitman, how nice to see you. Is everything okay? I just wanted to check on Lorraine. Haven't seen her in a few days." Patricia's smile didn't waver. "She's visiting her sister in Cleveland. Didn't she tell you? She'll be back next week. I'm just looking after the house for Dad while he's in Dayton with his mother." Dolores hesitated. Something still felt off. But Patricia was a lawyer, a respectable woman, Walter's own daughter. "Well, that's good to hear. Tell her I said hello when she gets back." "I will. Thanks for checking in." Dolores went home. She told herself everything was fine because Patricia had said it was fine. And why would Patricia lie? On day 7, Lorraine scratched a new entry into the basement wall. 7:12 p.m. Tells neighbor L. Is visiting sister in Cleveland, will be back next week. DW. Says okay, and leaves. She'd heard every word through the small ground-level window. She'd heard help arrive and leave in the same breath. 41 hours later, I broke through the side door and found my wife on the concrete floor. When Detective Okonkwo told Dolores what had really been happening, the old woman broke down crying. She called me 3 times to apologize. She sent flowers to Lorraine at the hospital. She told anyone who would listen that she should have trusted her instincts, should have pushed harder, should have called someone. But she didn't. And neither did anyone else. That's the thing about neighbors. We like to believe we'd notice if something was wrong. We like to think we'd speak up, ask questions, get involved. But the truth is, most of us don't want to be the one who causes a scene. Don't want to be wrong. Don't want to accuse a nice lawyer's daughter of something terrible when there's probably a perfectly reasonable explanation. Patricia knew that. She built her whole plan around it. Detective Okonkwo included a section in her report about community factors enabling the offense. She wrote that Patricia specifically chose a time when I would be away and when the neighborhood's passive observation patterns would work in her favor. Translation: Patricia knew no one would check. She knew our neighbors would see what they expected to see. A dutiful daughter, caring for an elderly couple, and wouldn't look any closer. She was right. I don't blame Dolores. I don't blame the Hendersons or the Garcias or the Morgans. They did what most people do. They minded their own business and assumed the best. But I think about that knock on day 6. I think about how close Lorraine came to being found. I think about Dolores walking away satisfied, while my wife scratched evidence into a wall, preparing for a rescue that almost didn't come. And I wonder how many other basements there are on streets just like mine, in neighborhoods just like ours, where the silence isn't peace. It's just waiting. 47 scratches on a concrete wall, photographed in sequence, projected on a screen, 23 grand jurors watching in silence. The wall told Lorraine's story better than any witness ever could. 3 weeks after I found my wife in that basement, we sat in a Franklin County courtroom, while the prosecution laid out what Patricia had done. I'd never been inside a grand jury proceeding before. I didn't know what to expect. What I got was something between a horror movie and a history lesson, with my family's destruction playing out on a 6-foot screen. The prosecutor was a woman named Constance Riley, mid-50s, gray hair pulled back tight, a voice that could have cut glass. She'd handled major felony cases for 20 years, and when Detective Okonkwo brought her this one, she'd apparently cleared her calendar for a month. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "what you're about to see is evidence created by a victim who had no guarantee of rescue. While she was being left to die, she documented her own imprisonment, day by day, hour by hour, scratch by scratch. The lights dimmed. The first photograph appeared. It showed the basement wall, close up, with the first scratches visible. Day 1. February 3. Locked in at approximately 2 p.m. P. Left immediately. No food. No water. The jurors leaned forward. Prosecutor Riley walked them through every entry. 47 scratches, each one photographed and catalogued by the forensic team. Each one representing hours of darkness, hunger, fear, and a woman's refusal to simply disappear. Day 4, February 6, P on, phone 3 p.m. Laughing, talking about restaurant reservations. Day 6, February 8. Someone knocked on front door 7:12 p.m. P. Told them L is visiting sister in Cleveland. Day 9, February 12, P on phone 4:47 p.m. Says, "Tell Walter, I've been checking on her every day. She's fine. Just resting. He'll never know." That last one made 3 jurors audibly gasp. I heard it from where I sat in the gallery. I felt it in my chest like a punch. 47 scratches. Each one a decision to survive. Each one proof that Patricia's perfect plan had a witness she couldn't silence. If you had 9 days in the dark with only a nail, what would you leave behind? After the photographs came the medical testimony. The emergency room doctor, who treated Lorraine, described her condition when she arrived. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, early-stage hypothermia, psychological trauma. He estimated that without intervention, she would have died within 48 to 72 hours. In your medical opinion, Prosecutor Riley asked, was the victim left in conditions that would lead to death? Without question, the lack of food, minimal water, and exposure to cold temperatures in a space with no climate control, this was a death sentence. The only question was how long it would take. Then came Dr. Clifford Sedgwick. He'd been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, and he walked into that courtroom, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. His hands shook when he took the oath. His voice cracked when he described how Patricia had approached him. She said her father was confused, forgetting things, making bad financial decisions. She said his new wife was manipulating him, isolating him from family. She seemed so concerned, so sincere. And you wrote a cognitive evaluation based solely on what Miss Brennan Holloway told you? Yes. Without ever meeting Mr. Brennan? Yes. Without conducting any tests? Yes. His voice was barely a whisper. I made a terrible mistake. I believed her. The notary, Gwendolyn Marsh, testified next. She brought the unsigned power of attorney documents and walked the jury through Patricia's instructions. She described how Patricia had practiced my signature in the margins, how she'd talked about moving quickly once Dad gets back from Dayton. She made it sound like she was helping him, Marsh said. Like she was protecting him from someone dangerous. I had no idea the dangerous person was her. But the testimony that mattered most came from Lorraine. She walked to the witness stand with her head high and her hands steady. She'd worn a simple blue dress. No jewelry except her wedding ring. She looked like exactly what she was, a survivor who'd earned the right to tell her story. For 2 hours, she recounted everything. The moment Patricia locked the door, the realization that help wasn't coming, finding the nail, making the decision to document, hearing normal life happening above her while she slowly starved. She never raised her voice, never cried, never wavered. 30 years of watching lawyers had taught her how to be the perfect witness. She gave facts, not emotions, dates, not dramatics. She let the evidence speak for itself. When she was done, Prosecutor Riley asked one final question. Mrs. Brennan, why did you keep documenting, even when you thought no one would find you? Lorraine looked at the jury. Her voice was calm. Because someone needed to know what happened. If I died down there, I wanted whoever found me to understand that I didn't go quietly. I wanted them to know exactly what she did. The grand jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They returned an indictment on 12 counts. Attempted murder in the first degree, kidnapping, felonious assault, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and 7 additional charges related to the forged documents and the scheme to seize control of my finances. 12 counts, attempted murder, kidnapping, a daughter turned predator, This case made national news, but how many never do? Subscribe now, because the stories that don't make headlines might be happening next door. Still watching? Comment your jurisdiction. Let's see how far this story reaches. The indictment was returned on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, Patricia was still missing, last traced to a cash withdrawal in Lexington, Kentucky. But that afternoon, Detective Okonkwo received an email from an anonymous account. It had a single attachment, a one-page document titled, Walter Brennan's True Will, What Lorraine Doesn't Want You to See. Someone was still fighting, and they wanted to destroy Lorraine's credibility before the trial even began. The True Will was a fake, created on Patricia's laptop 3 months before. The metadata proved it. The defense attorney quit that afternoon. Detective Okonkwo called me within an hour of receiving the anonymous email. Her voice was tight with something that might have been anger, or might have been dark satisfaction. Your daughter's still at it, Mr. Brennan. She sent us a document claiming to be your real will. Says you plan to leave everything to Lorraine and cut Patricia out completely. That's not true. My will splits everything evenly. I know, we checked, but here's the interesting part. The document she sent was created on her own computer 3 months before your mother died. The metadata proves it. I sat down heavily on the kitchen chair. Lorraine was beside me, listening, her face unreadable. She forged a will, I said. She forged my will and then sent it to the police to make Lorraine look bad. That's what it looks like. And she sent it from an IP address that traces back to her phone, from a coffee shop in Lexington. Which means we now know where she was, as of yesterday afternoon. Patricia had made a mistake. After weeks of careful running, she'd gotten desperate and sloppy. She tried to fight back, and instead, she'd told us exactly where to find her. The U.S. Marshals picked her up in Nashville 3 days later. She'd been living in a weekly rate motel under her middle name, paying cash, trying to grow out her hair. A clerk at a grocery store recognized her from the news coverage and called it in. I didn't see the arrest. I saw the photographs later. Patricia in handcuffs, her face blank, being led into a police cruiser. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, like something essential had gone out of her. They extradited her back to Ohio within the week. Her attorney, the expensive one she'd hired before she ran, withdrew from the case the day after the fake will was traced to her laptop. I can't build a defense around evidence my client fabricated, he told the judge. I'm sorry, but I have ethical obligations. Patricia was assigned a public defender, a young man named Terrence Okafor who looked overwhelmed from the moment he walked into the courtroom. He advised Patricia to take a plea deal. She refused. I'm not pleading guilty to anything, she reportedly told him. I didn't do anything wrong. I was protecting my father. The prosecution's plea offer was 12 years. Patricia turned it down. The case was going to trial. But before that happened, I needed to see her. I needed to ask her one question. The Franklin County Jail had visiting hours on Wednesdays and Saturdays. I went on a Wednesday, alone. Lorraine offered to come, but I told her this was something I had to do myself. The visiting room was exactly what you'd expect from television. Glass partition, plastic chairs, phones that connected you to the person on the other side. Patricia was already sitting there when they brought me in. She looked at me through the glass, and for a moment, I saw the girl I'd raised, the 19-year-old who'd held my hand at her mother's funeral. The law student who'd called me every Sunday night during her first year. The daughter I'd loved without question for 44 years. Then she spoke, and the girl disappeared. Dad, you came. I needed to ask you something, Patricia. Ask me anything. I'll explain everything. You'll understand once you hear my side. I picked up the phone. She picked up hers. We looked at each other through dirty glass. Why? I said. Just tell me why. Patricia's expression shifted. Something hard settled behind her eyes. Because she wasn't supposed to be part of our family. Mom wouldn't have wanted this. Mom's been dead for 26 years, Patricia. She's still my mother, her things are still her things, and you gave them to a stranger. You let a stranger wear Mom's ring, sleep in Mom's bed, take Mom's place. Lorraine isn't a stranger, she's my wife. She's a waitress from Toledo who got lucky. She never knew Mom. She never earned any of this, and you were too blind to see what she really wanted. I sat there for a long time, looking at my daughter's face, trying to find something I recognized. Patricia, Lorraine nearly died. 9 days in a basement with no food. You could have killed her. But I didn't. I left her water. I was going to let her out eventually. I just needed time to get the paperwork in order. Once you signed the power of attorney, once we had you properly protected, everything would have been fine. Everything would have been fine, I repeated. Lorraine would have been removed from my life. I would have been declared incompetent. You would have controlled everything. And that's fine to you. Patricia's chin lifted. I was protecting our family. I was protecting Mom's legacy. Someday you'll understand that. I hung up the phone. I stood up. I walked out of that visiting room without looking back. She wasn't supposed to be part of our family. That was Patricia's explanation. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of holidays and dinners and birthdays. And to Patricia, Lorraine was still an intruder who needed to be removed. Have you ever been the person someone else's family wished would just disappear? Patricia's plea deal was rejected by the prosecution. The case was going to trial. But the night before jury selection, Lorraine received a letter. Hand-delivered to our mailbox. No stamp. No return address. No signature. Just 4 words in Patricia's handwriting. This isn't over yet. Lorraine handed it to Detective Okonkwo. Then she went home, checked the locks twice, and slept with the lights on. The prosecutor displayed the basement wall on a 6-foot screen. Patricia looked at the floor. She never looked up again. The trial lasted 8 days. 8 days of testimony, evidence, arguments, and silences that felt louder than anything spoken out loud. I sat in that courtroom every hour of every session, and I watched my daughter's carefully constructed world come apart, piece by piece. The prosecution went first, and they didn't hold back. Prosecutor Riley walked the jury through every element of Patricia's scheme: the fake cognitive evaluation, the forged power of attorney, the copied key, the imprisonment, the lies to neighbors, the running, the fake will sent from Kentucky. This wasn't a moment of rage, Riley told the jury in her opening statement. This wasn't a breakdown or a mistake. This was a 6-month plan executed with precision by a trained attorney who knew exactly what she was doing. The defendant locked her stepmother in a basement and left her to die. She did it to steal her father's assets, and she almost got away with it. The defense tried to paint Patricia as a concerned daughter, pushed too far by legitimate worries about her father's vulnerability. Terrence Okafor did his best, but he didn't have much to work with. My client was afraid, he told the jury. She saw what she believed was exploitation of an elderly parent, and she acted rashly. Were her methods wrong? Yes, but her intentions were to protect her father, not to harm anyone. The jury looked skeptical. I couldn't blame them. The key testimony came from Lorraine. She took the stand on day 4, and she owned that courtroom. She described the basement in detail: the smell, the cold, the darkness that seemed to press against her eyes. She walked the jury through each day of her imprisonment, pointing to the photographs of her scratched entries on the wall. This one was day 3, she said, her voice steady. I heard Patricia on the phone, laughing, making dinner plans with a friend. I hadn't eaten in 72 hours. And this one? Day 6. A neighbor came to check on me. I heard every word through the ground-level window. Patricia told her I was visiting family in Cleveland. The neighbor left. I scratched it into the wall so there would be a record. Why was that important to you? Because I knew Patricia would lie. I knew she'd say I was never there, or that I'd left voluntarily, or that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. I needed proof that couldn't be argued with. When the prosecutor asked Lorraine to identify Patricia, she turned and looked directly at her stepdaughter for the first time since the basement. That's her, Lorraine said. That's the woman who locked me in and left me to die. Patricia didn't meet her eyes. Then it was my turn. I'd known this was coming, but nothing prepares you for testifying against your own child. I sat in that witness chair and answered every question they asked me, and with each answer, I felt something inside me breaking. Yes, I'd left for Dayton believing Patricia would check on Lorraine. Yes, Patricia had a key to the house. No, I had no idea about the fake evaluation or the power of attorney documents. No, I had never met Dr. Sedgwick. No, I had never suspected my daughter was capable of this. Mr. Brennan, Prosecutor Riley asked gently, do you believe your daughter intended to harm your wife? I looked at Patricia. She was staring at the defense table, her hands folded, her face empty. Yes, I said. I believe she intended to let Lorraine die, and I believe she would have done it if I hadn't come home early. The closing arguments were brutal. She didn't act in a moment of rage, Prosecutor Riley said. She packed her victim a single bottle of water and waited for nature to finish what she started. That's not passion. That's patience. And patience, ladies and gentlemen, is the hallmark of premeditation. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they came back, the forewoman's face told me everything before she opened her mouth. Guilty on 10 of 12 counts: attempted murder, kidnapping, felonious assault, elder abuse, conspiracy. The only 2 acquittals were on minor charges related to document tampering. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge gave Patricia 18 years, eligible for parole in 12. 18 years. That's the price for 9 days. Some will say it's not enough. Others will say a daughter should never see prison. What do you think justice looks like when the crime is this intimate and this calculated? As the bailiffs led Patricia away, she said something over her shoulder. Quiet enough that only the first 2 rows heard it. But a journalist caught it on her recorder, and it became the headline the next morning. Ask Walter what Mom's jewelry is really worth. I didn't understand what she meant, not then. But Lorraine's face went pale. And I realized this wasn't over. The padlock was gone. The chain was gone. But every time Lorraine walked past the basement door, she counted her steps. Old habits die slowly. 6 months after the trial, we were still living on Maple Ridge Drive. People asked us why we stayed. Friends, family, even Detective Okonkwo during a follow-up visit. Everyone seemed to think we should sell the house and move somewhere fresh, somewhere without memories baked into the walls. Lorraine answered them all the same way. We're not going to let her take our home too. But staying meant changes. Meant making the house feel different enough that we could breathe in it again. The basement door was the first thing we replaced. The heavy oak was gone, hauled away by contractors who didn't ask questions about why we wanted it destroyed. In its place was a new door with glass panels, letting light pour down into the space that had once been Lorraine's prison. We converted the coal cellar into proper storage. New shelving. New lighting. Fresh paint on the walls. You could still see faint marks where the scratches had been, if you knew where to look. But the police had taken all the photographs they needed. The wall didn't have to be evidence anymore. We kept the bird feeder. That was important to both of us. The Cardinals had been there when Lorraine first moved in, and she refused to let Patricia's shadow fall across them. Most mornings, we'd sit together at the kitchen window with our coffee and watch the red flash of wings against the bare winter branches, and we wouldn't talk about what had happened. We'd just be quiet together, and sometimes that was enough. Would you have stayed? Could you walk past that basement door every day and feel safe? Or would you have sold the house, moved away, started over somewhere no one knew your name? Lorraine started therapy in March. She didn't want to at first, told me she'd survived worse than Patricia Brennan Holloway, and she didn't need some stranger telling her how to feel. But the nightmares kept coming, and the counting kept happening, and finally she agreed to try. The therapist was a woman named Dr. Rosalind Hart, about Lorraine's age, who specialized in trauma survivors. Lorraine saw her once a week for 4 months, and slowly, the tight lines around her mouth began to ease. The nightmares didn't stop entirely, but they came less often, and one morning in July, she told me she'd slept through the whole night without waking once. I had my own grief to work through. Not just for my mother, who I'd barely had time to mourn before the world fell apart, but for Patricia, for the daughter I thought I knew. For the relationship we'd had before Lorraine, before the resentment, before the basement. Sometimes I'd catch myself remembering things Patricia, at 6 years old, begging me to push her higher on the swings. Patricia at 16, crying over a boy who'd broken her heart. Patricia at 25, calling me from her first real apartment to say she'd made it. Dad, she'd really made it. I didn't know how to reconcile those memories with what she'd become. Maybe I never would. The neighborhood was awkward for a while. Casseroles appeared on our porch from people who hadn't checked on Lorraine once during those 9 days. Apologies came, mumbled and uncomfortable, from neighbors who suddenly remembered they'd noticed something strange but hadn't wanted to interfere. Dolores Whitman came by every few weeks. She'd bring cookies or flowers or nothing at all, just herself. And she'd sit with Lorraine in the kitchen and drink tea and not talk about what had happened unless Lorraine wanted to. I think it helped both of them. By fall, we'd found a rhythm. Mornings with the Cardinals, evenings walking the neighborhood together, waving at the neighbors who now seemed to pay more attention. Nights with one lamp on in the hallway, not because we needed it, but because the darkness still felt too close sometimes. We weren't healed. Healing isn't something that happens all at once, like flipping a switch. It's more like the season's slow changes you barely notice, until you look back and realize how far you've come. On a rainy afternoon in October, Lorraine was sorting through boxes in the attic. Old tax returns, outdated insurance papers, things we should have thrown away years ago. That's when she found the envelope. It was tucked behind a stack of documents from my mother's estate, sealed, hand-addressed. The return address was a law office in Dayton. The postmark was dated 3 days before my mother died. Lorraine brought it downstairs and handed it to me. Her face was pale. "Walter," she said, "I think your mother wrote this, and I think she wrote it for me." The letter began, "Dear Lorraine, if you're reading this, I'm gone and I need you to know what I never said aloud. Walter chose right when he chose you. Don't let anyone take that from him." We sat at the kitchen table, Lorraine and I, with morning light coming through the window and the Cardinals at the feeder like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Everything was about to change again. My mother had written this letter 3 days before she died. She'd given it to her attorney in Dayton with instructions to mail it to our house after her funeral. The attorney had followed those instructions exactly, but the envelope had gotten lost in the pile of paperwork that accumulated while I was in Dayton, while Lorraine was in the basement, while our lives fell apart around us. It had taken 7 months to find its way to us. The letter was 3 pages long, written in my mother's careful handwriting, the same handwriting I remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists and notes she'd leave on my pillow when I was a boy. She'd only met Lorraine twice, once at our wedding and once at a family dinner the following Christmas. But somehow, in those brief meetings, my mother had seen something. "I watch the way you look at my son," she wrote. "You see him, not what you can get from him." I spent a lot of years worrying about Walter. After Carolyn died, worried he'd be alone forever, or worse, that he'd settle for someone who didn't deserve him. Then you came along, and I stopped worrying. I had to put the letter down. My eyes were blurring. Lorraine kept reading aloud, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "I need to tell you something about Patricia. I love my granddaughter, but I've watched her for years, and I see something in her that worries me. She holds on too tight. She counts what's hers, and resents what she thinks she's owed. When Walter married you, I saw the way she looked at your ring. She wasn't happy for her father. She was calculating what she might lose. I don't know what that means for your future. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But if I'm not, I want you to know that you have my blessing. Whatever happens, whatever Patricia tries to do, you were the right choice for my son. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." There was more. A paragraph about the jewelry, not Carolyn's jewelry, which Patricia had always coveted, but my mother's own pieces, a simple gold bracelet, a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother, a cameo brooch from her grandmother. She'd left them to Lorraine, specifically and intentionally, held in trust by the Dayton attorney, with a letter of instruction that they should go to Walter's wife, whoever that may be when I pass. Patricia had never known about this. She'd spent years obsessing over her mother's jewelry, while my mother quietly arranged for her own pieces to go somewhere else entirely. "Your mother saw it coming," Lorraine said. "Before any of us did, she saw what Patricia was." I nodded. I couldn't speak. One letter changed everything. 3 sentences from a dying woman who barely knew Lorraine, but who understood her own son's heart. Sometimes the people who see us most clearly are the ones we least expect. Who in your life has seen you that way? Drop their first name in the comments, just the name. They might need to hear it. Lorraine didn't keep the jewelry. She said she didn't need it, didn't want to own anything that might remind her of the fight that had nearly killed her. Instead, she made a proposal. 1 year after the trial, we established the Walter and Lorraine Brennan Foundation. We sold my mother's jewelry, all of it, including some pieces I contributed from Carolyn's collection, and used the money to fund legal aid for isolated seniors. People trapped in situations like the one Lorraine had nearly died in. People whose families turned against them. People who needed someone to document their truth when no one else would listen. The foundation is still running, small but growing. Every year, we help a few more people find their way out of the darkness. On a spring morning, about a year after we found my mother's letter, I stood at the kitchen window and watched the cardinals at the feeder. Lorraine was beside me, her coffee warm in her hands, her shoulder touching mine. The basement door was open behind us, light pouring down into a space that used to hold only darkness. "Do you think she knows?" Lorraine asked. "Who?" "Your mother. Wherever she is, do you think she knows how much her letter meant?" I thought about that for a long moment. "I think she knew when she wrote it. I think that's why she wrote it." Lorraine nodded. She leaned into me, and we watched the cardinals together, and we didn't talk about Patricia, or the trial, or the 18 years stretching out ahead. We just stood there, in our home, in the light. Thanks for staying until the end. If Lorraine's story moved you, hit that subscribe button because every story we tell here is about ordinary people who refuse to be erased. Share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone. And remember, the people who try to make you disappear are counting on your silence. Don't give it to them.